native speaker of? Oh yeah, which is a mix of a lot of languages. Huh. Thanks. Cool. Thanks. Good to have you visiting our house. Always nice with the guests. I was wondering, like, by a show of hands, how many of you are front-end developers, web designers, web developers, working kind of like in the front side of stuff? Okay, like half maybe? All right, because I was wondering if you, especially those who raise their hands, know who this person is. The one that say yes has seen this presentation before, so that doesn't really count. This is Dieter Rams. The name rings a bell? No, maybe no. Well, it says right there that he was the head of design at Brown. He's an industrial designer, or he's like the industrial designer. So during his time at Brown, he and his team developed or designed products that became household staples, and ever since the 50s. And these tables include these products include turntables, radios, and hair dryers, and many more. One product of his that I particularly like is the calculator. It's pretty cool. But I think like the reason why I like it a lot is because this is a Brown calculator originally released 30 years ago, 1987. And this same calculator you can go to brown.com and buy, and it looks exactly the same as it did 30 years ago. And I think the reason why this particular product and many of other Brown products stood the test of time is because of their good design. I had a clicker. Um, Now, you might think like, yeah, well, good design is kind of like abstract, or like you cannot really define what good design is. But if you're Dieter Rams, you can actually define what good design is. And he did in these 10 principles. And over the years, this became kind of like 10 commandments of what good design is. And I know this is a lot of information right now, so stop looking at it and let's just look at this one, which is the 8th one. And this one says, good design is thorough down to the last detail. Nothing must be arbitrary or left to chance. Care and accuracy in the design process show respect towards the user. And when he was talking about the design process and that care and accuracy, he was not kidding about it. These pictures are from an exhibition that happened in 2011 in the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, where they showcase over 200 of his sketches, models, and prototypes that eventually became Brown products. So you might be thinking, why am I talking about industrial design? Like, if this is about prototyping, like industrial design is not really that related to UX design. And for the most part, I would agree that there are two very different disciplines. But I think they're both based on that all design is human-centered. So regardless of the background where we come from, we are all building products that fulfill a purpose, and these products are meant to serve the user. And if the products serve the user well, then users are going to be happy. So if you want to make your users happy, you should prototype your idea today. So my name is Jonathan, like they have introduced me already before. I work here, and I'm working as a JavaScript / front-end developer. And I'm currently working on Klarna payments. Yeah, I've been working here like 2 years, so I don't really notice the echo anymore. But yeah, I was talking about Klarna payments, and maybe a lot of you are wondering what that is, because I guess like some of you might be familiar with Klarna Checkout, and Klarna Payments is not that different from Klarna Checkout. It's basically a JavaScript API that merchants can integrate with in order to be able to offer Klarna's payment method in their checkouts. And yeah, at the moment, we offer a couple of our payment methods through this API. For example, buy now and pay later, or slice it, which is basically pay in a couple of months. But in this product, we a couple of months ago, we faced like adding one new payment method, and that payment method is one that's called Pay Now. The concept is pretty simple. I think it's basically you associate your bank account with Klarna, and then when you want to shop online, you can pay directly using your bank account. And since this is a new product in Klarna, we decided that, hey, we need to prototype Pay Now before we release it. But why? Why do we need to prototype Pay Now? And really, what's even prototyping? So prototyping is taking all the screens, like the design of all the screens in your application, and linking them together in a way that they tell a user story. So a prototype is not the final product, it's just a simulation of the final product. And as a simulation of the final product, that means that it can have different levels of fidelity. So it can be something that looks like it does on the left, which is something like a raw sketch, and that would be called a low fidelity prototype, or it can look like it does on the right, which is a high fidelity prototype. And there can be different reasons why to choose different levels. Like, for example, maybe if you're doing something on the left, it's because maybe your idea is not still like well defined, and maybe you don't have a brand or a visual language. Or you can do something more high fidelity, like in the right, which is kind of like something that looks more like the final product and is using real UI elements. But regardless of the level of prototyping that you choose for your prototype, prototyping itself, it should be a low commitment effort. So in the previous presentation, Dr. Yuan was talking about like how being able to iterate on a product makes the quality better, which I do agree. He also said that in Klarna we settled to only use Java in the backend, which I don't agree, but that's neither here nor there. But yeah, like prototyping should be a low commitment effort in the sense that it should be something that you should be able to iterate on with low effort, because since prototyping is should be a low commitment effort, because since it's not the final product, you should be able to discard it when you're done with the prototyping and not really have any feelings attached to it. So why prototype? Why do we build prototypes? So, hello. There is a theory called the construct level theory, and it's basically a theory that studies psychological distance, that being how people feel about events and objects depending on how far or close they are to them in a concrete or abstract way. So there are different types of distance. So if we just think about the experimental one, imagining is abstract, and people imagine things that are away from them. Well, thinking is concrete, so people can actually experience things that are close to them. So I feel like this is a lot of like psychological bubble that it's better explained with an example. So I'm sure a lot of you have had an interaction that includes someone telling you, I have an idea for an app. And then usually, like, have you ever used Reddit? All right. So I have an idea for an app. It's like Reddit, but for cats. So the cats enter into this Reddit for cats, and it's going to be filled with videos of humans. And registered cats can only downvote posts, because cats wouldn't upvote, really. And like when you present this idea to someone, like hopefully they will say like, that's a stupid idea. But whatever feedback you will get, it will be feedback that comes from desire. So for example, like someone might tell you like, yeah, like, you know, if you want cats to use this application, then you need to build special hardware for them, like maybe a keyboard that is always warm or whatever. And you know, like that feedback is, since it's coming from desire, it's always going to be abstract. And abstract feedback is not really good to validate a product. On the other hand, if we build a prototype creates an experience. So if we have a prototype, we're able to bring the idea closer to the user. So since the prototype is close to the user, we're going to get feedback from a concrete place. And concrete feedback is much better when we're doing a validation for a product. So how can we build a prototype? This is a quick lookup that I did on Hacker News about prototyping tools. I don't know if you know, but we're not really lacking prototyping tools. I think we have too many. So a couple of examples of ones that I like. One is Balsamiq. So Balsamiq lets you build low fidelity prototypes, so something that kind of looks like you draw on a paper. There is another one called Envision. And Envision is it will be a higher fidelity prototyping tool because it has like really good integrations with design tools like Sketch, so you can design something in Sketch and import it to Envision. There is another one that I haven't really tried myself, but this is an application that at the moment is actually owned and developed by Google. So one of the selling points is that it can allow you to build prototypes using Material UI. But yeah, I haven't actually tried it myself. So there are different reasons why we choose to build low fidelity prototypes or high fidelity prototypes. And in our case, where we started working on this new payment method, Pay Now, we decided that we wanted to build high fidelity prototypes. And the reason for that is because the idea itself of Pay Now, which is basically a direct debit payment method, is not something that is completely new in Klarna. It has existed in checkout, for example. So like we have a clear concept of what our product is supposed to be like. And also we have a brand language. So we have an idea of how this application should look like. So we could use one of the tools that I just showed you, but also we're thinking like, we can maybe just use a couple of the tools that we already use to develop our web applications here at Klarna. So a couple of those are Sagui, the Bubble UI, Legplats, and Flow. And yeah, I'm going to be talking about this in just a minute. So this is the part of the presentation which is about how we prototype this new payment method, this Pay Now. But this is also the part that I'm going to tell you how you can use these tools to prototype your idea. So since our prototype is going to be a web application, we're kind of faced with the decision-making process of what are the tools that we should use to build our prototypes. And if you're a front-end developer nowadays, you kind of know that it looks something like this, which is like a bunch of frameworks and tools and build tools and etc. And it's kind of like starting a new project can often be like pick a mix of out of all these logos. But considering that prototyping, again, like it should be a low commitment effort, we don't really want to spend a lot of time taking those decisions because our prototype is not something that is meant to be a production product. So for that, we use a project called Sagui. So Sagui helped us by bootstrapping a new project. So the way that you install Sagui is just like it's just an npm package, and what it does is that it will take some decisions for us. So if we open a project that we create with Sagui and look at the files in there, there are going to be like a couple of files installed for us, which is a bit of setup for things like a builder, compiler, service with the hot model replacement, and a couple of other things. So if we want to get our Sagui application running, we just have to run npm start. And then if we open it in the browser, we have a base of a web application. And yeah, right now it's not very impressive, or at least if you visit it from the browser. But behind this, there is already a setup of a web server that runs JavaScript with EX6, and yeah, a couple of other things. So that means that we already have a foundation where we can start building our frames. So let's say that we want to start by building a simple form, which is a form where users enter their personal number. And for our prototype, we're going to build our prototype in a way that every frame, every screen is going to be a React component. So a way that we can build that personal number form using React is something like this. So if you're not familiar with React, and this actually kind of looks like HTML, right? So we have a header, an input, and a button, and it's using the HTML tags. And but this is actually a function, and that's what React is doing for us. React makes our UI functional. And yeah, so in this case, like this is what that personal number form would look like. It just has a title, an input, and a button. And yeah, it kind of looks like it could work, but we don't really have a way to see how it looks like. How do we get it to render? So for that, we use a project called Legplats, which is a React component playground. So it allows us to render React components in isolation. So the way that you set up a Legplats project is by first we create a configuration object, and that's going to be basically a list of all the frames in our application. And since Legplats it's a React component itself, we can just render it as the root of our page. So if we go back to the browser, and we still have our server that it's running thanks to Sagui, we can see that yeah, we have a we can see the frame that we can just create it, and it looks okay. There is a title, the input, a button, and yeah, it's okay. But if you remember, we want to build something that looks like this, that looks like a Klarna product. So how do we do this? How, like, are we just going to like style it from scratch, or maybe we can just use the Bubble UI? And the Bubble UI is a Klarna project that is basically Klarna's user interface. It's all these elements that you see when using Klarna's product, which are inputs, buttons, sliders, etc. So and these are all exposed in that UI library through React components. So if we go back to our frame that looks kind of like just plain HTML, we can instead use the React components. So it still kind of has like a structure that looks like HTML, but these are not HTML elements anymore. Well, now it's components that we are importing from our UI library. If we go back to our browser, then we can see something that looks kind of like this. So it's kind of starting to take shape. It has the right font and the pink button, the correct font sizes. And we can continue adding more stuff here. We can add the icon and some paragraph, some content. But in the UI, we also have a couple of templates. And these templates are basically a composition of different UI elements. So for example, we have this one called the center form, and it's basically a component that has a title, a summary, illustration, and buttons and fields. And yeah, by using that, we can go back to the browser and see how our UI is, or our screen is evolving. So basically what we can do now is just like a lot of repetition, not a lot, but basically repeat for all the frames that we want to add. So we can add another frame that it's, this one is to verify your details, and another one to thank consumers for their purchase. So eventually we end up with a bunch of screens, and that's pretty cool. But if you remember, prototyping is about getting all those screens together and linking them together in a way that they tell a user story. So how can we link them together? So for that we have Flow, and Flow is it's another React component that links our frames together. So what we can, how we use Flow is that we create a configuration object that basically has an array of the frames that we want to have, all the steps that we want to have in our prototype, and we render it similar to how we did with legplots, because this is our React component as well. And the only thing that is going to change in our frames is that now our frames are going to take a step next prop. And in order to be able to navigate through the prototype, every step needs to deal with this step next function. So in this example, when you click the button with step next, meaning that we go to the following step. So we end up with something that looks like this. So this is one of the prototypes that we built. And this is live now with Viaplay. And basically, it's that. It's just like a bunch of React components that are linked together using Flow. Yeah. So just a recap of the tooling that we use. We use Sagui for bootstrapping a new project. We use legplots for rendering the prototype frames. We use the Klarna UI in order to be able to use the real UI elements. And we use Flow for linking the frames together. So I think this setup worked out pretty well for us for a couple of reasons. One of them being is that all the pieces are interchangeable. For example, if maybe some of you have heard about Create React App, which is like this bootstrap project by Facebook. So, I mean, you don't have to use a GUI, you can use that instead. And it kind of has like, it has the same goal, really. Or maybe you can use Storybook to render your UI components or your frames instead of legplots. Or for example, if maybe you're prototyping for an Android app or an application that you want to have the Material UI look and feel, you can use the Material UI instead. Talking about the UI, regardless of the UI library that you might choose to use, the benefit of these React UI libraries is that they're going to be high fidelity with low commitment. And that means that you're able to produce screens that kind of look like this. So it's a prototype that will have real user interactions. So when you hand it over to people, they're actually going to be able to enter data in the inputs, which sometimes you are not able to do with other prototyping tools. And finally, and talking a bit more about that, I think it worked great for user testing. And since we're able to serve this I mean, we can serve this from our local computers, or we can put it on like a production server, but we can serve it. So that means that we are able to hand it over to people in a cafe or whatever, wherever we're doing user testing, or maybe even giving a link that they can access from their phones and actually have them test our product in an environment that is familiar for them. And it will have like real UI interactions. So when they enter data into an input, it's going to be like the native keyboard. So these are some links that you can visit for the tools that we used to build our prototypes, including the Klarna UI and the high order components, which are a couple of our open source projects from Klarna. And like regardless of the tools that you choose to use for your prototyping, I think it's important to keep this in mind, which is the care and accuracy in the design process and showing respect towards the user. And if you want to know what your users really think about your idea and you want that feedback to be concrete, then you should prototype your idea today. Thanks.
Okay, any questions? No? Just one? Zero? More beer? I just wanted one question so I could say Chun-Li, do the thing, but nobody will get that anyway. Okay, 0 questions. Then we thank you very much for coming here and looking.
I was here already.
Sorry?
I was here already. I work here.
The rest of us is happy to come back at a later date. So thank you for coming and thank you for staying, and please do mingle some more and I will hold the thing. So thank you.
Thanks.